Welcome to the PI Podcast, Political Insights for the Palaging Inis. I'm your host, Matt, and with me is my co-host, political scientist, meme lord with aloe vera extract and ascorbic acid, Borge.
Ginawa mo akong gamot naman.
Very healthy.
PI nyo, PI nating lahat, board at your service.
Yes, and this week we have a very special topic. Of course, this is coming after the 2022 national and local elections, and it's people have still, in a way, not recovered. A lot of people are still angry at each other, are still disappointed, and I think, people liked our last episode, our last Raw episode, which we discussed elections. But Borge, what do you think about what's going on right now and how people are talking about the election still? No?
I think it depends on who's talking, because as far as I have observed, the Marcos Duterte camp is already, moving beyond it. So, but I think the kakampings some of them are still irked by the results. But I think we're slowly moving ahead, trying to take stock of what had happened, what had occurred. And again, it's good to look back before we look to the future. So, yeah. And I think that's related to our topic for today.
Yeah, actually. And there are still people up to now who have, blocked or disowned, their family members, their friends. They're cutting each other's off based on the people who they voted for. This happened before, even with the 2016 elections, where those people who voted for Duterte, they've been, in a way, cutting each other off, or ending friendships and families and breaking apart. And in a way, we have guests to help us understand why this is the case, why we see each other differently. In a way, it talks about, of course, moral politics in the Philippines, inequality, democracy, and the urban poor. In fact, I still have my copy right here in my hand, and
I still have my copy here right now.
Yeah, it's actually still a very popular and very important book. And today we have the author, who will help us, explain, what this is. And it talks about things that happened in 2010, even before that, 2004, etc. And actually, it's a long historical view of what the Philippine moral politics, but in a way, it can sometimes help inform us of what happened in 2022. So yeah. And of course, he is. It's interesting. He's Japanese, so he's sort of an outsider, but of course, he speaks like a local, actually, which we will find out later. So our guest for this episode is a professor at the Graduate School of Global Studies at the Tokyo University of Foreign Studies, and he currently teaches, Philippine studies. And of course, he is an author of Moral Politics in the Philippines. Please welcome Professor Wataru Kusaka.
Woo! Hi, good evening, everyone. So thank you, Matt, Borja, for inviting me to this program.
Yes. Great. Yeah, thank you for coming. So, of course, let's just ask you first, why did you decide to study the Philippines, all the way from Japan? What interested you in the Philippines?
Because of series of contingencies. Actually, I have been interested in Asian countries. I visited Philippines for the first time in 1997, I think.
Wow.
Yeah, that's a time of I witnessed how Arab did his campaign during
yeah.
It's many years ago. So anyway, so as a Japanese, naturally I was interested in Asian countries which became the victims of World War II. So we learned history. So actually the issue of comfort women was very much controversial at that time. So which attracted me to visit Asian countries. So that's and also as a Japanese, we had a kind of sense of guilty to Asian people, no? So we have more advanced economy, while many Asian countries are underdeveloped. So this kind of inequality also directed me towards Philippine studies, actually. Then, okay, and interesting is that when I visited Philippines for the first time, I was surrounded by lots of street vendors, beggars, hinginang pera, kuya, pabili, 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 no? So, so I was so shocked. At the time, I was so naive. At this now, I'm so, I don't, medyo manhid na, no?
Manhid.
Yung, pero dati, napaka-naive pa eh, no? So, nasaktan ako eh, no?
Yeah.
Nasaktan ako. Then, naisip ko, bakit ganito ang kalagayan natin? Parang ang feeling ko, gusto ko rin malamang ang kanilang side, no? You know? Ano kaya inisip nila? Ano kaya yung mundo na tinitingnan nila? Ano kaya buhay nila? Ano kaya isip nila? No? So parang I got the kind of curiosity. So I want to change my positionality. No? I was born and raised as a Japanese. But what if I were born in a slum communities in the Philippines? What would be my life? No? So, you know, so I wanted to deconstruct myself. I wanted to change my positionalities to broaden my worldview. So that's the start point, I think.
Yeah, actually, we just noticed, and the listeners will notice, you spoke a bit of Tagalog. Can we ask, of course, how you learned it? Did you have classes beforehand, or did you just learn from your field work? You know,
I have several grammar books, but I learned Tagalog on the street actually.
Okay.
With the help of grammar books, textbooks, but I practiced. Because as I wrote in my book, I lived in a slum communities, so you are not allowed to speak English. Pag magsalita ka ng English, ayaw mo eh, di ba? So, and also I was more happy to speak in Tagalog than in speaking English. So, pag magsalita ka ng English, as a Japanese, kasi parang we have inferior complex, no? Mas magaling kasi mag-English, magaling. So, you know, so pag mag-English ako, nahiya ko. Nahiya ko talaga. Kasi hindi ako magaling mag-English. Pag mag-side ako ng Tagalog, kasi people are happy. So, you know, so I was more happy to speak in Tagalog. So I was more nationalist than, Filipinos. Why do you speak in English? Mag-side tayo ng Tagalog. Ganun. Noon eh.
Parang ko mas magaling pa siya sa Tagalog kaysa sa akin.
Kamusta naman kamusta ang experiences mo living in a urban poor community?
So yes, I learned a lot. Actually, I also studied UP Dreaman, no? So but because of my English was not so strong enough, so I eventually dropped out from UP. I withdrew from communities.
Yes. Gaano ka katagal sa mga slum communities?
Originally 1 year. 13 months. 13 months.
So how do you find the people? Like, are you still friends with some of them? Like, how was your relationship with them?
Initially, I made friends with street vendors at Philcore. So I asked them to find my accommodation. So that's a way I found my accommodation, my space to live. Then I also made friends with lots of tambay.
Mga tambay.
My street boys, because they're always on the street. So pag lumalakad ako, what? Wataru, tagay tayo. So, ganun eh. So, yes. So, ganun ang style ko. So,
yeah. So, from these experience with the slum, people in the slums, or the vendors in Matambay, what inspired you to make, of course, your book, Moral Politics? Like, why do you think, moral politics out of the people that you've met,
Thank you for the question. Actually, I was thinking about the duality of the Philippine society. So I really changed myself while in the slum community and while in the UP. So, I have to switch my language. I also have to change my dress, clothes. I also have to change the way I move, behave. So, there are lots of different things. So this duality first grabbed my curiosity. Then I developed the idea. Perhaps the biggest difference is not only languages, but also the biggest difference would be the different conceptualization moralities that can be very big impacts on the Philippine politics. That's my initial idea. Naisip ko ang ganitong idea habang lumalakad ako sa flyover ng Philcoa. I still remember. So,
the duality. So two moral spheres.
Yeah.
Two moral spheres.
Because in UP you discuss about good governance, accountability, blah blah blah. But pagbalik mo sa Muslim communities, iba naman kwentuhan ng tao no? So sabi niya, mas makatao siya, mabait, parang mata pobre siya, ganun. No?
So panahon ni Erap yan. Yeah.
Ariyo.
Okay.
Napansin ko nga parang 'di ba dapat yung mga taga-UP dapat makabayan, dapat magaling sila magtagalog, pero yun pala mas kailangan din na mag-English So parang like Wataru, I think mas Pilipino ka sa mga UP students ngayon Mas maraming English well anyway. But yeah, that's that's interesting. It's very different now with the academic values, and there are also street values. But first, maybe you can tell of course, our listeners, how do you define moral politics as, in the background of your book? Like, what is moral politics?
Well, so as I define in my book, so moral politics is a kind of politics over definition of good and evil. So enemy making, friends making. So it draws a boundary between we and they. So by referring to moralities. So that's a moral politics. Actually, I came up with this idea to highlight the difference between the conventional patronage politics. Pag magsalita ka ng yung Philippine politics, many people use money, money, violence, and patronage, clientelism, blah, 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 blah. So I wanted to highlight. So we have to realize the importance of moral discourses beyond money politics. So that's why I came up with this idea, this concept.
Yeah.
So it actually went against yung usual na discourse na structures, patronage and such.
Yeah.
Okay.
It actually gives like the agency back to the people, because I think even right now in the elections, people like 31 million people voted for Bongbong Marcos and Sara Duterte. And people think that, it's because a lot of people say that it's because of, vote buying and misinformation, two structural, explanations. But I think what's embedded with like Wataru's book, and perhaps we can apply it to here, is there's a kind of like a difference in moral judgment. There's a different kind of idea of what is good and what is evil, and it depends, of course, a lot on what I noticed on class. If you're rich, you have this idea of good, and if you're more masa, iba yung tingin mo sa kung ano ang mabuti or kabutihan. So Borj, maybe you can talk about your impressions with the book and maybe how this informs, politics.
Again, I agree with the main argument that morality is something that should be considered, and hindi mo talaga mauusisa na maayos ang issue ng morality if you would not give back agency to ordinary citizens, that they're not mere victims of disinformation. Pero siguro for our listeners, I think I can ask Wataru just a summary of it. Ano ang pinagkaiba ng moral spheres ng middle at saka upper class at saka ng mga mahihirap?
So as I said, actually I did my research in early 2000s. Medyo obsolete na framework ko na yun. So while I was doing the fieldwork in early 2000s, the public spheres were really divided by the class line. The masses and the educated citizens, so they use different discourses, different languages. There are no opportunities of deliberation. So So, so as Matt said a little while ago, so in the civic sphere, so they talk about good governance, accountability, transparency, blah, 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 blah. While in the mass sphere, they talk about masa, pantai digging. So, I don't know. So that's a difference I realized. But this condition has changed, I think, a lot, because 20 years have passed.
If I remember correctly, you mentioned this was the time of ERAP, and of course, ERAP Estrada's presidency ended in a very dramatic way through EDSA 2. It's a sequel of People Power Revolution. But maybe you can talk a bit about like what got your attention with regards to EDSA 2 and how people reacted to EDSA 2.
Thank you so much for the question. Yeah, actually, I remember that the EDSA DOS happened while I was writing my graduation thesis, not as an undergraduate school. So I was so excited about the news, So because I read lots of books on the Philippines, I was so excited to read nationalist history textbook written by Leonardo Constantino or Chodragonshio, so Masa, So it's very interesting. So I was also excited by Leito's Passion on the Revolution. So those happened. Wow, Angarinan Pilipinas. So, so really, really, the events, Philippines really changed my life. So my respect to the Philippines is very big. But after 100 days, it's a stress happened. So that's a big, big event for me. So I realized we really have to understand the mindsets of the massa, the poor. So that's why I decided to live in a squatter community.
Yeah, and how did the people you were with in the squatter community, react to, EDSA DOS, and how did they find Joseph Estrada, ERAP,
So typically they said that the rich are united to oust ERAP. So Kawashi ERAP, Wala naman siya kasalanan eh. So they are very much sympathetic to ERAP. I remember.
Yeah, I think I have a quote right here. It's page 109. This is a businessman who talked about People Power, 3. That says the crowd was rude, and so 3 was just like there were groups of gangs. So these are the people that defended ERAP, people who liked ERAP. And then I think another one. You have a lot of very. Actually, when I read this part, it felt very raw and real. They said. Let me check. I felt that it was stupid. I didn't see why they had to do it, why they supported ERP to begin with. This is the elites reacting to the masses. To me, it was barbaric. The typical massa movement. The method they used was violent, so they saw it as it. But I'm trying to look for a quotation here. Here it is. It's about People Power 2, they reacted. You could see they all have cars. And so it started with the middle class and it continued with the flow of communication. The middle class were the ones feeling the crunch at the time, whenever the government was not doing good, particularly in the time of ERAP. So, yeah. So yeah, there's a very two different reactions to it. In fact, I think there were a few other reactions that they felt betrayed, that it was the middle class that betrayed the ERAP. It revealed the kind of snobbery, because they felt that because ERAP fashioned himself as one of the poor, Yeah. So yeah, do you remember it? Well, trying to look for a quote here.
What were you doing during EDSA 3, Matt?
I was in grade school actually, but I do remember that because I'm in I was in a private school. I was quite anti-ERAP. But then, oddly enough, like when I was my taekwondo teacher, who was a bit more, working class, he said, "So why do you hate ERAP?" It's like, "Oh, because he was." I just remember it's because he was corrupt. But I didn't understand why, and he just I remember he just frowned, but at the same time he just said that he was on the side of ERAP because ERAP was just he was, in a way, they didn't understand. Like he was like other politicians. Other politicians are the elites. They're corrupt. But why was Erap kicked out because of his corruption? And is it because he was more like the poor? So that's the difference in their interpretations of corruption. So it's okay for the elites and the rich dynasties to be corrupt and not for Erap to be. Kasi sabi niya, Erap's only crime was sweating, right? Life was good under Erap. So people power too just upset us. That's a quote from si Anne, from a housewife. I guess he stole a lot of money, but I heard he has funds to help the poor. I support Erap. I don't understand why they kicked him out or why they put him on trial. Maybe he really is guilty, but why did Gloria become president? So yeah. So what do you think about this mixed reactions towards, the use of EDSA, EDSA 2 and then EDSA 3? Maybe either. Like the weird duality there. Yeah?
Yeah, we really cannot understand EDSA 3 and EDSA 2, separately. That's one thing. And I think I would like to pick on Wataru and of course your comments on this one. Is the 2022 election the vengeance of a failed EDSA 3?
Well, I didn't think in that line, but it can be. But actually, my generation belongs to the time of EDSA 2 and EDSA 3, which is very different from the generation belonging to EDSA 1, no? So People Power Revolution. Well, for me, this electoral outcome is nothing, but it's not surprising because I have been very much familiar with discourses of Marcos' golden era. I have heard a lot from my friends. So I can recall how my friends talked about the days of Marcos. So it's not surprising for me. So this is not just a new thing. This is not new thing. This is not a new event created by propaganda, online propaganda. So there have been a very foundation, no? So to accept, to resonate with the online propaganda. So this is not surprising for me.
Okay. So why do you think they still side with Marcos? So wait, if I understand you correctly, the people that you were with, the slum people, informal settlers, who also supported Erap, also believe in the Marcos narrative, the golden era. And
yes.
So why do you think that is? Did you ever ask them why? Bakit? Bakit ganyan?
Well, perhaps they have different reasonings. They have different reasons to support Marcos and Erap, but similarity is that they don't like, basically they do not appreciate the post-EDSA politics.
Okay.
Politics or people power narratives. No? So, so they wanted something different.
Yeah. I just remember, we talked about this in the elitism slice in the podcast, and that it's a familiar thing. It's because, of course, the Lenny supporters, they affirm EDSA, but they also say, if you're not with us, you're uneducated, you are delusional, you believe in disinformation, lack of education, maybe sometimes bayaran din kayo. You're paid to support Marcos. Your vote is vote. So it's a similar kind of elitism. That kind of stems through, comes from, in a way, this tradition, I suppose, was this embedded culture. So what do you think was in post EDSA politics that they didn't like? Besides, of course, I think the elitism. What didn't they like about?
Okay, so as I understand, they don't like the gap or discrepancies between beautiful words and actual things. So politicians talk about, they talk about beautiful words, but the actually situation is very much different. So this discrepancy is so huge, so which can disillusion the people.
The disillusion. The failure of EDSA, of the post-EDSA period to eliminate, social problems, despite, trumpeting beautiful words. That made it, disappointment.
And I think I also remember it's in chapter 5 of the book. It's in urban governance. He talks about, of course, the informal settlers. They heard the beautiful words, for example, of like Bayani Fernando, tried to make it Metro Manila beautiful, but this is through banning them, pushing them as the street vendors aside, so yeah, maybe you can tell us a bit about that. Did they experience, of course, in the local level, the different,
yung iron hand ni Bayani.
Yeah, or basically local governance, yeah. How did your informants like experience local governance,
Well, actually, I was together with them because I was also selling fruits every night, and also they asked me to lend money. So because they said getting money from Bombay is expensive, so they asked me to loan from me. So
wow.
Yeah, so pag nahuli sila, no? So if their items are confiscated by MMDA or policemen, so I was also affected, the government.
Oh wow. Okay.
So
Yeah.
yes,
Yeah, you yourself like experience the difference of beautiful words, beautiful Manila with this, with violent actions
from the
So, yeah.
government. Yeah, I don't know why some people are still surprised that Bongbong won. Yeah, it's an old problem. There's just multiple layers. Patong-patong na. And then this one, the 2022 elections is a release of all those discontent.
Yeah.
Perhaps different people have different contexts. We have to really understand it. You cannot generalize. So perhaps the good thing about Bongbong is that malabo siya. So
Malabo.
empty, wala siya concrete messages, right? Malabo.
Yeah.
So this emptiness really worked for him. Precisely because he's empty, he was able to attract many people's aspirations, diverse abstract aspirations. Perhaps Lenny Robredo was too concrete.
Yeah.
Programs and policy. So
yeah.
That's a good point. Yeah.
Yeah, but Matt and I were actually discussing that Bongbong is an empty slate. People project what they want on him.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
Kung anong gusto nila, doon na lang lalagay nila. Mahihirap kasi kay Lenny kasi sabi mo na Lenny's too concrete. Hindi mo na mo-projectan ng fantasy mo si Lenny as is dapat.
Yes, that's my argument too.
Yeah. Actually, I remember, speaking of Marcos, I read in your book that the reason why EDSA, the first EDSA People Power was a success is because there was an alignment. I believe it's you called it moral nationalism, where both civic and mass sphere was in agreement, and they had a common, enemy of the state, which is Marcos. And in some ways, it happened again in 2010. Now, maybe you can connect that. Perhaps moral politics in a way cause problems, antagonisms. But also, if it's aligned, it can actually unite the nation. Maybe you can talk about it. So, when can you think? What conditions do you think can moral politics unite the nation? And did that happen in a way with Bongbong Marcos? When he talked about unity. Is there that kind of? So, what do you think about this?
So for one, we need strong, formidable common enemy of the nation. So existing enemy of the nation is first condition for the unity of the people, I think. This is sad, but you need constitutive outside to construct we, right? Collective we, identity we.
Yes.
So that's one thing. Then and also people need to share kind of fantasy that the world, the Philippines will be better. No, so people need to share fantasy for better Philippines. So we need someone who can provide the fantasy, which everyone can accept. So that's the two things I think.
Okay.
Yeah. Yun ang mahirap eh. Wala pa tayong great enemy for now. Ewan ko kung anong hahanapin nila.
Yeah. So well, your book has been, it's quite relevant, but as you said, it's in some ways it's outdated, But I was wondering, when your book first came out, maybe you can talk about like how people received it. What are some of the reactions? And then maybe you can talk about what has changed. How have you updated, the moral politics? So yeah.
Okay, thank you. So actually, I was very much afraid. I was nervous. So I was thinking that my book would trigger lots of reactions because the argument is too critical to my friends, belonging to intellectuals. So so I have lots of friends, in academic community, lots of friends in NGO communities. So I was afraid that they would hate my book, my argument. So that was, but I need to publish it because I got lots of ideas from my friends, from in informal settlements, but also rural poor. So I need to feedback what I learned, what I thought. So I need to feedback my ideas to the Philippines. That's my responsibility. So. And also, I was not seeking my position in the Philippines. So, however, I would be hated by Filipinos. I can still live in Japan. So, bahala na, ganito ang isip ko, bahala kayo. You can criticize as you like. So ito ang aking idea. So, bahala kayo. So, ganon ang isip ko. Pero surprisingly, I found lots of my friends, not only friends, but also people whom I have not met appreciated my book. So that's my big surprise. So I didn't expect this welcome.
Okay, I think I understand why it might anger people, because what your book says is a lot of what the fighting for good governance, voters' education, like at NAMFREL, they're saying that these are not enough, and that in some ways you also gave voice to a lot of the poor people we never heard of. Like sometimes there are some, like you mentioned long stories about some people who were heartbroken when ERAP was ousted, and they were even crying, saying that why they have to do this, they're in a way, because he was one, they saw him as one of them, so it is a very difficult message to accept if you are from the civic sphere, if you're an intellectual. So if you're detached, but at the same time you have to well, when I read it, it's like, oh, okay, it shows that what we're doing as educators, scholars, it's not enough. We have to do more. So yeah, but I suppose, let's move to the next question. So did anything change?
Okay,
Like,
before that, please let me add.
Okay.
Actually, it was nice that I was a Japanese, I was not Filipino. Perhaps pag Filipino ako, baka hindi ako nakasulat ganito no book, So, I remember Nicole Pratt once said that you are too brave, in writing this book. So you brave ako. So perhaps, so I got this, braveness precisely because I'm a foreigner. So that worked well, I think. And one more thing I like to highlight is that perhaps lots of Filipino intellectuals and students, educated people accept my book because you share the kind of principle of learning from the masses. That's a kind of foundation of Philippine nationalism, I think, right? So revolt of the masses, So you have this idea, you have developed this idea. We have to learn from the masses. We have to be together with the masses. We have to fight for the masses. So you have this idea. So you are not able to negate my argument. So as I understand, lots of people, lots of readers found my book as a kind of instrument to reflect themselves.
Yeah.
So I'm so happy with this.
Definitely, we're happy you read it too.
And I think that Filipino, intellectuals, intellectual students are much more tolerant than I described in my book.
Okay. Yeah. What board? What is your reaction initially about the book when you read it?
Again, it's great because it gives a voice to, yung mga hindi naririnig unang-una. At saka personally, ganito rin ginagawa ko dun sa ibang project ko. Naalala ko tuloy yung one of my drafts, ang komento ng reviewer. tama nga, ano ba? Kasi the topic is about political participation at saka participatory governance. Nag-comment yung isang reviewer. I know him, pero napag-usapan na rin namin. Ang komento niya, tama nga, ang nasa isip ng ordinaryong Pilipino, ano ba ang pakinabang ng participatory governance? So, you know, may divide talaga sa pagitan ng the ideals being carried by academics at saka ng mga advocates at saka yung pananaw ng mga ordinaryong Pilipino na kailangan mabigyan ng tulay. At saka hindi magkakaroon ng tulay kung if we will not listen or if we would not expose kung ano ba talaga yung pananaw ng mga ordinaryong Pilipino. And yeah.
Yeah, and it is, well, I understand some people that say that coming from a foreigner, you know, that they're very critical about it. But in fact, when I first read it, you know, initially it felt very familiar. I didn't really see that much anything new. But really, one of the strongest parts is precisely, of course, a lot of the stories that he shares about from his informants. You know, that of course you and I are aware of, like, debates about EDSA, you know, but this one gives it the realness. Like these are real emotions, these are real, I suppose, again, moral politics also, it's about moral judgments. In some ways, I don't know, like it's like the morals don't really change, you know, it's just how they're interpreted, you know.
It's
like,
hard, or it takes a long time.
Yeah. So yeah.
Binabasa ko nga na-confirm yung mga, kasi nung nasa EDSA ako, nasa my parents, everyone surrounding me, mga pro-ERAP din eh. So it actually confirmed yung yung pananaw nila kung bakit ganyan nangyari. At saka pro-ERAP din ako nung panahon na yun.
Ay, wow. Kinoto pa na si... Oh, sorry. No, wala.
It's a secret.
It's a secret. Yeah, okay.
Pero yeah, nung EDSA 3, ang ginagawa ko naman nun. Yeah, I was actually watching it. And you know, ang political consciousness ko was actually formed in response to EDSA 2 and EDSA 3. So yeah.
So I was actually asking, so Wataru, like after it's now 2022, did anything change with regards to like moral politics? Did you have any updates to your theory?
Yeah, thank you so much for the question. I like to discuss a lot about updates, actually.
Yeah, great.
As I said, my framework, my book is somehow obsolete. Although I believe this concept of moral politics is still relevant, but I believe the concept of dual public sphere has become obsolete. It's not. We have to update understanding, because you know, when I was doing fieldwork in the early 2000s, the public sphere was really divided along the class line. But nowadays, so you know, since the mid 2000s, the Philippines has recorded high economic growth, and you know, so that in the poor, they were the majority of the constraint. But I think the social condition has changed. So because of economic growth, I think we are seeing the rise of the lower middle class. So yung pag nakikita ko, no, anak ng mga street vendors, anak ng mga jeepney drivers, nag-graduate naman sila college eh. Although it's not elite college, no, nagtapos naman sila, no, so hotel restaurant management, or some of them are working in a call center, so they get job in formal sector, no, so you know, so talaga umaangat ang kanilang buhay. So perhaps this class D is very much important, no. So previously we regarded class E as a kind of upper poor, but nowadays I think they have become lower middle class. So that's a big change. So they understand both of the world. They understand this mass sphere. They also understand discourses of civic sphere. They understand. So they themselves have lived the duality of the Philippine society. So these people are very much important nowadays, I think.
Okay. Yeah. The old dualities are disappearing or being blurred.
Yeah.
Yes. Actually, so now I think the contact zone the overlapping contact zone has
Mm.
become much bigger.
Okay.
Mm.
So ano na yan, baka magkaroon sila ng a distinct moral sphere of their own.
Yes.
That would, yeah.
Yes. The problem is that when I wrote the book, I was expecting that expansion of the contact zone, the overlapping space, would mitigate the moral antagonism between civic sphere and the moral mass sphere. Expansion of contact zone is what is needed. So that's good. So that was my idea. But actually, I was wrong. So this expanded contact zone, or people in this contact zone, are very much frustrated people. This lower middle class, they are the supporters of Duterte. They are supporters of BBM and Sara. No? So previously, the moral antagonism was between the poor and elite. But nowadays, this emerging middle class, they antagonize elites at the top of the society, and they also antagonize the bottom of the society, mga criminal, mga pasaway, mga tambay. So if you are born in a slum community, so dati ang kasamahan mo lahat pobre, pero you worked hard, you finished college, you got job at a call center, no? So you go back to your community early in the morning. Pagbalik mo sa community mo sa morning, tapos nakikita mo yung mga tambay, nakadulak, nakainom, tapos nakahingi ng pera sa iyo, no? Nakakainis di ba? So they shared the same situation before, 20 years ago. They were same. But they believe, those who somehow got better job, those who finished college, they believe they have acquired this position, status, due to their hard working, diligence, so self-discipline. May discipline ako. Hindi ako iba. Iba ako, hindi ako ganito. No? So, so wala silang disiplina, kaya ganyan na siya. So they really differentiate themselves from others in the same community. So I really observe the differentiation even within poor communities.
Yeah. Hindi yung konsepto ng disiplina. Yeah, I'm actually reading very recent works. So actually responded to your book. Kina Garrido and Regilme,
yes.
Adel Webb would be there. I'm also giving my own response na this concept of disiplina nga ang lumulutang. And probably, sabi mo nga, it's floating out of this new group of people.
Yes, because in the early 2000s, so people hated, my respondents, my friends hated the discourse of disciplina because in the name of disciplina, the houses were
demolished.
Demolished, yes. So the stores are demolished. So they hate the discourse of disciplina. But nowadays, during the pandemic, my friends, they organize kind of what's that? Gumawa sila na yung tarpaulin, may disiplina ang community. Ganun, no? So they patrol around the community, so they really embrace the kind of ethos of discipline. So that's a big difference, after 20 years. So their moralities, their dominant moral discourses have changed. This was a big surprise for me.
Yeah.
Paglabas ng disiplina. Yeah.
I mean, to me, I'm a bit shocked, but I've seen this before. Like when you start from the bottom, and then eventually through hard work, grit, pagsisikap, diba? Sariling sikap, diba? Like you don't. Yeah, that's isa pa yun. In a way, I'm trying to understand. Like, okay, so this is an attitude towards discipline, but has it changed in a way in their political expressions? Like, does it change the way, the kind of politicians that they support? I mean, in some ways, they support. Is this why they supported like Duterte? Like because in a way it's so mixed. So I'm not sure I can trace it now. So, do these people support Duterte? Yeah.
Yes, generally. So they are very much supportive to Duterte, and I can understand because while they work very hard day and night. So, but they have not yet reached to the economically stable middle class. No, their economic status is still unstable. Although they are not, yung talaga walang-wala. No, medyo may
May kaya.
nakakaraos na siya, pero
Nakaraos.
but so they are frustrated. Bakit ganito pa? Also, actually, dati mas relax ang buhay nila eh. Pag umulang, they can just take a rest at the house, right?
Yes.
So because you are self-employed. So, but nowadays they are employed. So they really have to commute. They have to wear uniform. They have to follow the job description.
Yes.
They are supervised from the boss. So it's more stressful.
Yeah.
So
More stressful.
so they are stressed and they are fatigued. But hindi pa sila nakapagtagumpay. So they are stressed and frustrated. So therefore they develop antagonism against elites who maintain the unequal system. And also those who mga pasaway, mga
pasaway. So both,
those who do not work.
It's a new middle class,
Yeah,
it's a new middle class. Ang naalala ko dyan is yung the theory of relative deprivation proposed by Tedger. Ang argument naman niya ay it's not poverty that caused the French Revolution, but it's the
inequality.
Not inequality, but this rise in recovery. Pero nagplateau yung recovery, but expectations kept on rising. So nagkaroon ng misalignment. So hindi absolute poverty, but relative poverty. So feel nila na hindi na sila makaakyat pa.
Yeah.
Especially again, the French Revolution, the middle class. So at saka yung middle class ng French Revolution baba rin ang tingin sa mga urban poor. So that's a nice to review. Pero will this rise in the discourse of discipline? Ano ba ang patutunguhan nito? Ano ba ang mga pwedeng patunguhan nito? Will it lead to revolt or will it lead to just acquiescence na resilience?
Both, I think, both. So because to navigate the precarious neoliberal economy, they have to discipline themselves. So they have to internalize the ethos of self-discipline. So this is much neoliberal, right? They work as a neoliberal governmentality. So lots of Filipinos are working in the precarious global neoliberal service industry, in which they have to discipline themselves to navigate themselves the dangerous and precarious working environment. So in a sense, they have become docile laborers. So, but at the same time, so as I said, they develop antagonism. So this can lead to somewhere else. So, however they hate elites, however they are frustrated with undisciplined neighbors, undisciplined family members, they cannot eliminate them. They don't have power, right? So they cannot fight against elites. They cannot eliminate ostracized community of family members. They need somebody who work for them. It was Duterte.
So it's a revolt vote. So that's their way of resistance.
In a sense, they are docile laborers under the neoliberal economy. But in a political sense, they are revolting.
So it kind of makes me think, maybe they're against the pasaway because it reminds them of their old selves. So it's
you actually hate your old self.
Yes, exactly. So actually, this is related with religion. So we can observe the kind of the rise of born again, born again, similar to kind of charismatic movement. So the typical discourse is that dati bugoy ako pero ngayon ganito na. So they also emphasize creation of new self, So dati wala akong so
ngayon nakaraos na ganun.
So they emphasize the transformation of the selves. So I think it's related.
Well, what a blessing to governments to have. Hindi mo na kailangan disiplinahin yung mga tao. They will just have be self-discipline.
Well, it's more, how you say, would you call it organic or maybe it's bottom-up kind of discipline? Like, galing sa sarili nila di ba? Nakadaos sila dahil sumunod sila or sumikap, sariling sikap, di ba? That's another thing.
But this change is embedded in economic transformation. So 20 years ago or maybe 30 years ago, the most of the Filipino people are living in a society in which your hard work or diligence or your talents are never rewarded. No, if you are tenants or if you are street vendors, however you work hard, your success is limited, right? But nowadays you have more opportunities to go abroad. You have the work or call center. So so you have more opportunities.
Yeah.
So previously, so
Yeah.
perhaps this transformation of the Philippine society from the one in which your hard work are never rewarded to a new society in which as long as you discipline yourself, you may be able to succeed.
Yeah.
So that difference is very big.
Yeah. Pero my take on that, I think it's not something new as well. Medyo luma na to. At ang palagay ko, ang pinanggalingan nito would be the OFW sector.
Yes.
Na yung mga Pilipino, again, I came from an OFW family rin.
Yes.
Mga Pilipino na napunta sa mga bansa na talagang disiplinado. Again, the Middle East would be there. Singapore would be there. Na disiplinado. So what I think what they got from their experience, tsaka yung kanilang relative success, is two things. They got hard work, the value of hard work, tsaka yung value ng self-discipline.
Yes.
O value ng disiplina. Yun ang binalik nila sa Pilipinas.
Yes, that's why OFW have biggest support base for Duterte and Marcos, right?
Yeah. Tapos kumalat yan. So, siyempre, nasa sila, lower class communities. So, nakikita rin ng mga tao na, successful na tong isang kapitbahay natin. No, ganun ang magiging model.
Yeah. Although, a lot of these changes, they seem to come from, like, of course, upward mobility. Like from the mass sphere, they understand, of course, the civic sphere. What about? Do you have any observations with regards to maybe the civic sphere and how that has it changed or adjusted to these economic realities? In the same way, the people from the mass sphere created a new middle class morality. What about the civic sphere?
Mga mayaman.
Oh, hindi naman mayaman, but middle class, upper middle class.
Yeah.
I haven't done research on that. So, but my sense is that perhaps more stable middle class, they are also getting more individualistic than before, I think, because they also have more opportunities than before. So previously, perhaps there are more people, active in civil societies, no? So. But nowadays, there are more opportunities. Instead of changing the system in the Philippines, they can have lots of channels to pursue their individual ambitions.
I see.
I think that's also difference. I think I have had lots of NGO workers having difficulty in organizing new members.
Interesting. Yeah.
Yeah, I think regarding your question, Matt, you may one of the readings that got recommended to me by my reviewer, yung kay Garrido. He actually conducted a series of interviews on upper and middle class and how they shifted to the discourse of discipline as well. So nakisama na sila. The current upper middle class. So they're all singing the same tune na kulang nga daw sa disiplina ang sistema natin. So yeah.
Yeah. I actually want to ask, there are two new developments that might have actually complicated also the moral politics. Number one, you mentioned Garrido. I think a listener or a friend of mine actually mentioned that Garrido also established a relationship between space and, of course, someone's values and, their moral interpretations, moral judgments, like especially in the original book, it's between those in the slums and those in gated communities, civic sphere gated communities, and slums and informal settlements are more the mass sphere. But now even the space is changing. More and more people are going into, say, for example, condos or dormitories where they work. So and the way the changes in the space affected the moral politics. And then another thing would be, you could talk about later, is social media. How has social media acted as in a way, a contact zone for, perhaps those people in the mass sphere and the civic sphere, some places in the middle. That's why you can't control who you can talk to. It's always, someone different. You don't know where they came from. Maybe you can try, but it's different. So how have these things changed moral politics in a way?
Thank you so much. Actually, I realized listening to you. So we usually discuss that social media has divided public sphere, right? So it just encourages the echo chamber. So you belong to this group, you just heard of voices of the people belonging to the same community. So you don't know the discourses of other groups. So this is echo chamber. But I also realized that perhaps still these people belonging to the lower middle class, emerging middle class, they have opportunities to understand the discourses of both spheres. So how can I say? So okay, ganito na lang. Yung mga anak na yung mga kaibigan ko, yung mga anak ng street vendors, anak ng mga farmers, so they are educated. So they actively write in English. So they so they use more sophisticated English. But they support Duterte and Bongbong, So there is kind of how can I say? So previously,
Yes.
so public sphere was very much divided. So the poor, those who are belonging to the mass sphere, was not able to join the civic sphere. But nowadays, there's a kind of more interaction. Somehow, this boundary of two public spheres are more porous. So
Yes.
people can go in and go out. Even though online public sphere is divided, still there are lots of opportunities of interaction. I don't know, but that's my observation.
Yeah, more porous. Yeah, I think social media made it more porous. You can look into the lives of people from the other sphere, and vice versa. Kaya nga nagkaroon ng poverty porn.
Whoa, okay, careful. Actually, I come to think of it, when you talk about social media, anyway, physical space no longer matters. No, you can actually talk to people all the way in, Visayas, in Davao, Mindanao.
It still is. It still is. I think the absence of, not really absence, but the marginalization of physical spaces of discussion, especially during the pandemic.
Yes,
I think it actually gave a license for people to be more rabid.
Yeah.
Kasi hindi ka magiging ganun, hindi mo gaganunin yung kausap mo kung kaharap mo eh. Hindi mo basta-basta pwede murahin kasi baka sapakin ka.
Yeah.
Unang-una. Ngayon, kung social media, wala, indirect naman, nasa Twitter space eh. Pwede mong away-awayin kasi alam mo naman hindi ka masasaktan. So, wala yung regulatory, the internal regulations na makikita mo sa physical interaction, which is a tragedy, I think.
Although it is also, perhaps I see it as an opportunity of something, like, in a way, because in the pandemic, you're looking for social interaction, new rules, of engagement would have to be made, In some ways, people can make their own rules. They block for certain people they don't like. So you have more control as to who you can talk to.
Okay.
So we're saying that, you can, that new rule, well, it doesn't mean that the rules are absent, but in a way, it's an opportunity for new, more rules of engagement to be created. But we don't really know about that yet. But I suppose this can move on to, I suppose, a related topic, which is, how has moral politics and in some sense social media affected the outcome or the engagement of people in the 2022 election? So, Wataru, I'm sure you've had some observations with how people talk about the elections. Have you observed moral politics in, say, for instance, the Kakampink, or the supporters of Lenny, and of course the unit team, BBM and Duterte supporters? Any observations?
Actually, this is the first presidential election I was not able to cover in the field. So
Okay.
I have covered presidential elections since 1998. so,
Mm.
so medyo nalungkot ako. Pero due to the pandemic and my family situation, I was not able to go to the Philippines to witness it. But I
Yeah.
have followed it, the development of the electoral campaign and outcome. Well, um, my take is this. Again, this emerging lower middle class plays a
Mm.
significant role. So although you cannot deny that regionalism has played, it's a very obvious, right? Regionalism is a big factor, but
Mm.
regionalism cannot explain the kind of um, expansion of the support base of BBM and Sarah.
Mm.
So as many people emphasize, I mean, uh, the youth vote. No? So
Mm.
I think the youth, millennial, Gen Z, belonging to the emerging lower middle class, they are very much important. They was crucial, I think. So one of the paradox I realized is that Lenny Robert approach to the lower classes, with
Mm.
the promise of Angat Buhai, but she was supported by the economically stable middle class. There's a
Mm.
discrepancy, right?
Okay.
Mm.
Why? So why the promise of Angat Buhai was not attractive to the lower class? I think one of the mistake of Robledo camp is that they regarded class D as upper poor.
Upper poor.
Upper poor.
Mm.
So perhaps they believed as long as they provide concrete socio-economic programs, for the poor or economically marginalized, perhaps
Mm.
they would support Lenin's campaign programs. But in reality, it was not.
Mm.
So why it happened? So as I said, so this class D is no longer upper lower class, but they have become lower middle class who do not
Mm.
always need concrete programs of the government
Mm.
because they have developed. So nakaunladan kanilang buhay, no?
Mm.
So they have realized certain upward mobility by them with their salary shake-up. So why do they need this tool from the government? So
Yeah.
that's not what they want. So this was kind of misunderstanding of Robledo camp. So that's my understanding. Then why did they resonate with this martial law fantasy of BBM
Mm.
camp? So my understanding is that this martial law legacy or fantasy propaganda, they envision state-society relationship opposite to the current situation.
Mm.
So in the past 20 years, what developed the Philippine economy was self-sacrifice, citizenship up ng mga
Mm.
Filipinos. They go abroad, they work hard, they send money to the Philippines, they consume a lot. So the state was rather dependent on the self-sacrifice,
Mm.
struggle of many Filipinos. So the state was just relied on the people. The state just celebrated them as new heroes, Bagong Bayani, So, but according to the discourses of BBM camp, during the martial law, the people were able to rely on the state, led by the strong leader.
Mm.
So it's an opposite state society relationship, and and also nowadays these people, they are frustrated, they are fatigued in the neoliberal, precarious, stressful labor.
Mm.
They want to depend on something. Leon, they like to gusto nila makasama sa state eh. Hindi yung sariling sikap na. So nagsariling sikap sila ng 20 years. So now this is the time to relax. Gusto nila maka-relax. So if you look at the propaganda music video of Bagong Lipunan, so you really see the functioning state. The state really provides wealth and protection to the people. The people and the people follow the government with discipline. So the late Marcos constructed highway and people drive with discipline. No? People do not drive crazy. No? So so tapos pag gumawa ng bangketa, so they nakawalis ang mga tao. So may discipline. So the state provides. People follow with discipline. So this is totally opposite to the current situation. Nowadays people work. They send, consume, the state develop. So perhaps people are tired of this. So that's why they are attracted to this, the illusion of Marcos golden era. So that's my understanding, my interpretation. So in other words, so this neoliberal fatigue or kind of helplessness of self-sacrifice. No? So they have gone through this experience. So that's why they're attracted to this online propaganda, I think.
They want something better. They want something better. Hindi lang basta tulong, but they want something better.
They don't need concrete socio-economic programs. What they want is kind of vision of different society, vision of different state. They can relax, they can rely on. So they feel in which they can enjoy stable life.
They can consume in freedom. So, walang magnanakaw sa'yo, walang magpipikpakit, walang hold up. But I would like to add to that. I think they want to make their ethics of discipline into a national, a national program.
Right.
So sa tingin nila dahil gumana sa kanila, pwedeng gumana sa buong bansa.
And it's funny. It's not discipline that comes from necessarily education or the education system, because they had to learn it on their own anyway, from the streets, or just like literally just discarte nila. So at the same time,
discarte.
In some ways that they want, perhaps, I don't know. Well, it's still a bit confusing to me, but I think number one, you're right. They want to be affirmed that their kind of discipline is correct and would be, I suppose, affirmed by the state. Because in a way, Lenny's campaign does not really talk about not so much agency of it. Well, they talk about. I mean, I don't know. It's a weird thing with Robredo campaign. It talks about two parts. One is nasa laylayan, yung mga mahihirap, yung mga kailangan ng tulong. Yung tumutulong naman are volunteers, but the volunteers are middle class, educated. So that there is, and they did try to, I suppose, bridge that gap, but it did not translate. You know what I mean? Like most of the people that followed Lenny were celebrities, were young professionals, were graduates. So I suppose the people that had to do it by their own bootstraps, by the skin of their teeth, sariling sikap, did not see, saw them differently. What do you think?
Yeah, I would agree with that. Sabi nga ni Wataru kanina, hindi na nila kailangan eh. At pag in-offer mo, nakaka-insulto to one extent. Na alam mo naman kaya mong gawin, tapos o-offeran ka ng tulong. Ang palagay ko dyan, merong mga, again, we need empirical data for this, but I think a part of the apologists or the BBM support base, they actually found Lenny's program as pagbibigay ng limos. And pagbibigay ng limos is a double-edged sword. It can either be considered as good or an insult.
Okay.
So, pero ang ano ko dyan is, end of the day, it's themselves. They're projecting themselves, their individual, hardworking, disciplined selves into the state. And Bongbong being an empty slate actually facilitated that projection. And go back to what a selfish society.
Well, I suppose it's not selfish, more like at the very least I see it as autonomy, a sense of autonomy, which is one form of empowerment.
Being a collective as autonomous entities.
Like it didn't come from someone else, because Lenny, she gives it to you. She and her followers gives it to you. For minsan sinisika parang ikaw mismo diba? Dapat So it's quite complicated, but it does make sense. No, I see it now. So
They draw their self-esteem
Mhm.
from self-struggle, from self-sacrifice. Na
Uh-huh.
hindi sila humingi ng tulong at walang tumulong sa kanila. Sila lang ang that's the mentality. Na sila lang.
Although I do want to ask maybe for both of you, because honestly we try to define moral politics, but where does moral politics really come from? I mean, in some cases it's class. Yes, the experience is a class, but what else? And deep down, like where do our morals come from?
Uh, I didn't use a concept moral politics to analyze this this latest election. So, well, I don't know. So, because I was not able to talk to the people directly in this election, so I just followed my comments from my friends supporting Marcos. But what Borja said is actually it resonated with comments from my respondents. So so they have worked. So nagsalilinsikap sila ng matagal. So tapos inaalok pa ng lugaw. Parang so why lugaw has become so controversial? Because lugaw is a symbol. So we don't need lugaw na. Hindi na kaming kailangan lugaw. Ganito pala ang mababa ang tingin niyo sa akin. Matapobre pa kayo. Kasi kaya so the way Robledo used lugaw as a symbol helping the poor, it just invited backlash from them. So kawawa naman si Lenny. Kahit naman ba, no? Kawawa naman. So actually my friends talked about lugaw, nagtawanan sila sa lugaw ni Lenny. Why nagtawanan sila lugaw? Because they have kind of self-esteem what they have done in the past 10 or 20 years. So we are not beggars. Appreciate lugaw. We have developed our life. So and also it was much more fun to envision your aspiration in the empty bonbon.
I see. Empty bomb. Okay.
Empty bomb. But
it just wrote empty signifier, no? So mas masaya ka dyan.
Okay. Very broad unity. You can project everything to it. Naalala ko lang. I remembered one thing. This was from an old documentary about Nazi Germany, Rise and Fall of the Third Reich by William Shirer. They were actually interviewing one of Hitler's close friends. His friend quoted Hitler and one of Hitler's speech. And this is what he said: "A hungry man doesn't dream of bread and butter. He dreams of caviar and champagne." So yun eh.
See.
Kaya kaya nga sabi ko, ang pagbibigay ng limos is a double-edged practice. You need to find the appropriate audience for it. Hindi mo siya pwedeng gawing general claim kasi may ibang may insulto dun.
Couple use of symbols or gestures. So
and again, the projection of something better than lugaw. Masala ko lechon ni Lenny yan.
Lechon ni Lenny. That's a good one. Yeah. I mean, honestly, I'm a bit speechless right now. It makes sense, and I suppose, I think you could agree with me on this, that moral politics comes from psychological interpretations. Depending on their backgrounds, right? Life experience, Usually, in a way, there's a level of psychoanalysis that you need to do, or social psychology, in order for you to perhaps pinpoint, because a lot of these things are, in hindsight. Malalaman mo lang pagkatapos na, di ba? Ang ginawa mo na, di ba? So I'm sure she didn't intend to insult them, but she didn't expect it. So
one thing that I would like to highlight from Wataru's argument, we cannot understand ang laylayan without taking into account social mobility. I think that was the gap. They understood laylayan, almost as a caricature.
Or constant,
or constant if you don't take into account the presence of social mobility. Kasi mag-iiba ang pananaw mo sa laylayan if you take social mobility or deep promise of social mobility, at the very least, the promise of social mobility, the actual presence of social mobility, pero more on the promise side. Mag-iba yung equation pag sinama mo eh. So,
Gosh,
so yeah.
you know, I'm actually shocked that, you know, in some ways, okay, I suppose we can go on to this last, like,
ano ko lang, last thing.
Yeah.
I think the poorest of the poor probably voted for Lenny.
Oh.
The poorest of the poor probably did, because they're the ones who need.
Okay.
And that would explain the presence of, you know, the real marginalized in her rallies.
Yeah.
Na the poorest of the, yung talagang kailangan ng tulong.
Yung magsasaka, di ba?
Yeah. Pero yung mga hindi na kailangan, yun nga eh.
Which are a lot. And I suppose the development of the Philippines, I suppose, lower middle class, you know, it worked against her in some ways.
Or yung, or yung mga naniniwala na hindi nila kailangan ng tulong, which is another group. Na yung, kahit na napakahirap nila, pero naniniwala sila na hindi nila kailangan ng tulong. Yun ang, you know, that's another, it's an empirical question. We need to take that into account.
I feel like her, like, I mean, her campaign is based on like early, outdated ideas of poverty, you know, like you can't win with that kind of thing. Now, the Philippine demography is different.
Produkto ng poverty porn yan.
Yeah. Okay. Sorry, what are you going to say?
Yeah, may I add one or two things?
Sure.
One is that, yeah, you're right. Actually, you cannot understand this election with perspective of interest politics, because Lenny provided more, better socio-economic programs for the lower classes. So it's rational for the lower classes to support Lenny, but it didn't happen. So what drove the people? It was not interest, or it was not concrete benefits. They pursued morality. So moral politics defines the electoral outcome. It was not rational calculation of benefits, right? So yeah, you can say it was not interest politics, but it was moral politics which determines this electoral outcome. Because, so another thing is that so this election maybe this is a kind of redemption for the emerging middle class, I think. Because dati pobre sila. Dati pinagtawanan sila, no? Dahil pobre, walang wala. Pero now they have reached to this stage. So this is a time of redemption. You know, so actually one of my PhD student, Filipino PhD student, doing fieldwork, ethnographic studies with X Japayuki in Japan. One of the most interesting her finding is that, so she was asking Marcos supporters in Japan, why do you support Bongbong? So as a discussion goes deeper, most of her respondents would say, Kagaya sa akin. So they kind of establish parallelism. Parallel, no? So similarities between Bongbong and their life, you know.
Okay.
So mga entertainers, dati pobre sila, tapos naging Japayuki, pinagtawanan. Diba? So they have kind of shaming. They have endured the shaming. So although they have reached somehow, you know, they have got somehow economic status, but they have shame. So now this is time to regain their dignity. So they have somehow overlapped their situation with the Marcos family. Yeah. So although they have worked for the nation, for the Filipinos, the Marcos has worked hard for the Philippines, but precisely because they are the Marcoses, pinagtawanan sila, demonized sila, no? So hawa sila. So they have become kind of underdog, no?
Yeah,
for sympathy, no? So you know, so the more they are beaten, the more they sympathize because they overlap themselves. So you know, so they have this is the politics of shame and redemption.
So in other words, Bongbong Marcos became a victim, and they identified with the victim at that day. And the more they bullied Marcos, you know, the more
hindi ka pa nakapagtapos, no?
Yeah. Oh my God.
High school graduate ka lang, no?
Oh, yeah. That's powerful.
Same with Arab. That's why they identify with Arab.
Yes. Tapos they were not allowed to go back to the Philippines, no? So no, it's similar the situation is similar with many OFWs, although they are working for the Philippines, but they can't go back. So somehow they sympathize, they have developed a kind of overlapping with their lives and Marcos says.
That is interesting. I do remember one of our Twitter contacts said that she likes Marcos because both of them did not graduate, so, and she doesn't care if he hasn't graduated, there's that connection with them, identification with them, I suppose. Yeah.
Also, actually, Bongbong was the best in putting himself in the popular narratives or popular storyline of Passion of the Jesus.
Yeah.
Passion of Revolution.
Yes.
Marcos says they worked hard for the welfare of the Philippines, but democratic elites.
The Pharisees. Yeah.
So he was shamed. And he died outside of the Philippines. He was not allowed to go back to the Philippines. But this is a time of redemption, resurrection.
Me and Borge, we're talking about. We looked at how Marcos looked like in his campaign rallies, and he always looked very sweaty, and he had bad hair, very dark. And if you look at Lenny's always very fresh. She's always very clean. So maybe people, I thought, that Bongbong Marcos looking like that, in a way helped him look like his supporters. He looked like a lot of the people, and he looked, in a way, if you think about it, like Christ, he's very sweaty and wet.
And then yung Pong Nazareno na maitim. Tatawa ka na naman. That's why it's one of our most popular, if not the most popular devotion. Yung sa Pong Nazareno, itim na Nazareno kasi kakulay nga natin.
They tried to grab at him,
which is
if you look at that, we should send videos of that.
At saka ilang taon na walang translation, di ba? So naipon-ipon yung urgency to
magpapunas sa
magpapunas
sa santo. Oh, wow.
Alam tuloy yung video ni Duterte na nagpunas ng toilet at binaton doon.
Oh my gosh. Okay. So these are very interesting and new, observations. We share some observations, so it's kind of interesting, but also makes it very difficult to predict. Knowing how complex it is, I suppose the question we have to ask is, how do we live with moral politics? Like on one hand, how do we act and present a campaign without insulting people? Like, should we be as vague like Bongbong Marcos, or can we be like, how do we move forward from this kind of thing? What do you guys think? How do we live with moral politics?
Question. Borja, ikaw na lang.
Sige, mauna ako. Again, we cannot avoid it first and foremost. Ang solusyon ko dyan, and this is, I think we're trying to do math, which is we try to lift up, present a more general set of values that can bind together, contradictory visions of the future. That's why we're advocating for civility, for being, trying to bridge gaps, trying to bridge conflicts. Pero again, this is, how do we live with it? How do we understand it? You may say that it's unpredictable, and I think it is to an extent. But I think one way for us to understand how it would work is for us to, let's stop considering this as something new. Kasi people being surprised at the 2022 elections is just mind-boggling. It shows a lack of understanding of what what drives our society. Kasi kung alam mo kung anong pinaguhugutan nito, hindi ka masusurpresa. Kahit ng 31 million, hindi ako nasurpresa doon kasi pag halo-haloy mo yung mga boto sa 2016, it would come close to that. And pag halo-haloy mo, as I said multiple times, yung boto kay Grace po, kay Binay, kay Defensor Santiago, combine them with the votes with Duterte, you would have approximately around 30 million. So it's not. I think we should stop saying that it's a surprise and we go deep. We go deep. We need to find where it's coming from.
Personally, I suppose what I try to understand here is that, because of the changes that Wataru also brought up, we can't rely on old narratives, because it's not just Lenny helping the poor that didn't work. It's also, the old populism. Isko also hindered to, galing din siya sa mahirap, di ba? Manny Pacquiao, galing din siya sa mahirap, but they didn't get any votes, so it's no longer enough to be with the poor. You have to present something they want, that's a weird thing. Yeah.
Which is something greater than what they are experiencing.
Yeah.
It's something way, way greater than what they're experiencing.
Because honestly, like, you can still argue that Manny Pacquiao still, in a way, has the OFW story. Literally, he went, most of the time he boxed in the US, so you can count him as an OFW technically, But so why did Bongbong Marcos win and not him? That he's all these things. Well, practically speaking, he is like every other people, but Bongbong Marcos is that and more.
And more.
So it's that and more that kind of perhaps gave an edge over Manny Pacquiao. Like, in a way, Manny Pacquiao was able to, suddenly sikap din siya, but he wasn't. I'm not sure he was able to translate that into like maybe a public image, a national scale.
Kasi absenteeist naman sa Senado, so he could not appeal to the discipline discourse.
Okay. Well, yeah, he's disciplined as a boxer, but not as a senator or a congressman.
So Isko, I think Isko is a loss. Wrong timing kasi si Isko naman. Isko could have achieved something similar.
Yeah.
He could have achieved the end more, but he was pitted against a Marcos.
Well, I think it's interesting, I think just like a lot of Wataru's observations, are still there, it's still observable. A lot of the symbols changed, a lot of the, so you can't expect it to work at, the same way. It's weird. I remember when I was reviewing your book, like there's things like doctors for Cory, it's like for Lenny, like doctors for Lenny. So it's harkering like a lot of the magic of EDSA, and what the reason, in a way, the same criticisms that are thrown to ERAP supporters from People Power 3 are the same criticisms thrown at BBM supporters about, you're uneducated, or you're not, so it's that same elitism that is it's still there, that's observed here. So honestly, it's difficult to move. Honestly, I asked the question, but it's difficult. So I suppose we need to, number one, make new symbols that reflect new realities. But that's a motherhood statement. What those statements are, it's not. But we can't. It's weird. I mean, in a way, they're there, but we have to package them new in order for you to win. Like, I don't know. I mean, in some ways, you can read the book and you can really, if you solve the puzzle, the ingredients are there to win an election, actually. So yeah, but at the same time, it's like I can't say
hindi binasa ng team ni Lenny yung libro ni Wataru.
Oo nga eh.
Sayang. Talo tuloy sila.
Kasi luma na kasi ang framework eh. So,
well, I think the BBM team did. So, yun ang delikado, Wataru, any closing remarks, no, or like about how do you move forward, Yeah.
I don't know about talking about the election. So as long as I think the candidate who established the strongest resonance with this emerging middle class, so they are likely to win. So that's the situation. So the poor used to be the majority of voters before, but nowadays it's not. So simply appealing to the poor is not enough. Okay. So if you like to win the presidential election, you have to realize this. And also concrete benefits is not sufficient. So you have to really provide kind of fantasy or vision, which resonate with people's aspiration, especially with the biggest voters, so emerging lower middle class. So what they want. So you have to really consider it.
Fantasy.
That's another question. What is the middle class? Because the middle class is not a constant; they change. What's middle class in the 90s is different from what's middle class now. Like, and that's another thing. even though they don't have like employment, sometimes they go on Shopee, online selling. You know, they simply, or they sell food. You know, or they sell like certain products. So you know, it's complicated. Like you can't say that all they do is work from home. You know, but they're not employed necessarily, but they have a supplier and they sell. So that's not the economy changes, and we have
economy changes, and also the subjectivity changes.
Yes.
But actually, my sense is that the middle class is more stressed than before. Right. So
More
people,
stressed.
increasing number are sacrificing their autonomy for social mobility. If you like to succeed, no, so you have to sacrifice your autonomy. You have to discipline yourself because of the economic structure. Lots of Filipinos are working in this global neoliberal service industry, which highlights kind of emotional labor. You really have to control yourself, even your emotion. You have to control your emotion. So when you're dealing with angry American customer at call center, or when you're, so in many different ways, so people are engaging in this stressful labor. So it really affects the psyche of Filipinos. So I don't have data, but I have heard the incidence of suicide is increasing, and also the number of mental disease or
mental health.
Mental health problem is getting big. So I think the Philippines has become kind of stress society. So because I came from the stress society, so I understand. 20 years ago, 25 years ago, when I went to the Philippines for the first time, I felt I really emancipated. I came from very disciplined, stressful society. When you are in Japan, when you are raised in Japan, you feel like you are part of the machine. Parang isang parte ng makina.
Right.
Para makaunlad ng ekonomiya. Wala kang freedom, wala kang kalayaan. Pero pagpunta mo sa Pilipinas, ang gulo, ang chaotic, pero masaya. I really liked it.
Yeah.
But this sense of freedom has lost in the Philippines. So that's a big change. So it really affects the mentality of Filipinos, I think.
Yeah.
So you pumunta kasi sa Pilipinas, then Japan came after you. The culture came. And Filipinos also worship Japanese culture to an extent. So
they love anime, they love
and the discipline.
The discipline. Yeah.
It's not like an influence of Japan, it's just influence of economic structure, I think. Economic structure.
Yeah,
so,
it makes
biggest problem for me is that I have lost the place to retire. So my dream was to retire in the Philippines, to spend the rest of my life. But Philippines has become not very stressful society, so where should I be?
Sa Japan mas malamig.
Because feeling ko ako ang isang OFW sa Japan so nagsasakripisyo ako sa Japan para sa sa retirement.
Yeah.
That's very enlightening.
It's great that Japan and Philippines have more in common than we think. And
by the way, Matt, last note siguro regarding moving forward. I think I remembered in news, opposition actually announced that there would be a bigger coalition in the future, and I think they didn't get the entire point of the elections because Filipinos don't need a bigger coalition. They need a quote unquote a more pure coalition or more pure opposition, untainted by the kakamping label.
Diba?
Mga trapo.
Mga dilawan.
Yeah, and for them to announce that there would be a bigger coalition, they just didn't get the entire point.
What was the point?
They didn't get the entire point of the election, which is Filipinos are demanding, to an extent, moral purity.
Moral purity.
Yeah. Or at least an alignment with, emerging values.
Yeah, I wouldn't call it I wouldn't call it purity, but alignment would be better.
Yeah, alignment would be better.
Like, it's funny. I suppose a lot of people would say that, then they said liwanag sa dilim, very moral imagery. But pero parang hindi naman madilim eh. Remember, Duterte was very popular. They didn't see it as, hindi naman sa tingin nila na madilim ngayon eh, di ba? It's they're quite satisfied with his governments. So to in a way assert a moral framework that does not resonate with them, is dangerous. It was dark for the middle class that hate Duterte, but not the majority.
Yeah.
Yeah.
They,
So
they just couldn't they couldn't settle with that.
Yeah.
They just couldn't absorb that plain and simple fact. Which is quite sad.
Yeah.
So much brain, so little processing.
Okay. So honestly, I'm having difficulty trying to condense all of what is heard, because it's all been. Okay, you may not say it's new, but for me, it is enlightening, and I do thank you for, and to thank Wataru and you as well for, this new view of morality, because morality, again, in a way, is a primary concern of politics. It's the center. It's trying to find what is good for the state, what is good for the public, but we're not hearing each other. And I suppose that's one way that we can move forward, is to listen. I suppose, what do they say? Because remember, EDSA dos and EDSA tres, it's literally two people shouting at each other, but not really listening to one another, not dialoguing. They see each other as different people because of, again, interpretations, of psychological interpretations of their experiences. So it's difficult to unite, but I suppose the best way to unite is, and to find find newer symbols. You can only find it when you can talk with one another and listen earnestly and trust one another. So yeah,
and if you're actually looking for it,
because I suppose it's the book. It talks about people who, in a way, aren't really talking a lot with one another, but still managed with symbols that they get projected. Now, I suppose it's a weird thing. We can talk with one another with social media, but we can listen. But I suppose that's one way we can move forward.
Yeah, the adjustments that Lenny's camp made at the last minute, not only in their logo but also in their
house to house.
Yeah, they can actually learn if they want to. If they can find things if they're looking for it.
Right.
I don't know if they're looking for it.
Anyway, so before we wrap this up, any last open message to Filipinos, Wataru?
Okay.
Yeah.
So actually, I got a question: how do we deal with moral politics? So my answer is that maybe we just use our morality just to navigate ourselves, not to appeal our superiority to others. Just use your morality just for yourself.
Yeah.
Just to navigate yourself. Don't use your morality. Don't appeal morality to differentiate yourself with others. So I think maybe we can differentiate good morality and bad morality. Bad morality is to differentiation, to making hierarchy between others, and yourself. So that's not good. So that divides society, and this is dangerous to democracy, because in democratic society, however you hate others, you have to live together with them, right?
Yeah.
You have to create society together with them. However you hate their ideas, their morality, their worldviews, you have to work together with them. That's a democracy, right? So don't use morality in democratic discourses, I think. And also we have to admit we are all idiots in a sense. So you don't pretend to be, don't pretend to monopolize moral higher ground.
Yeah.
We are all idiots. So democracy should be run by idiots, not by saints, right?
I see. That's a good message, actually. Democracy is run by idiots, and we have to accept that. Yeah.
Embrace it.
That's why it's PI podcast. It's a podcast of idiots.
We know that we know little.
And we need each other. We need each other to figure things out.
And the last message is that maybe we have to accept living together with annoying idiots.
Okay.
Yeah, because so let's go back to my memory. So when I firstly lived in a slum community, there are lots of drug addicts. Actually, the person who just lived next to my door was Kuyale. He was he was a pusher. So he used lots of teenagers to sell, illegal drugs. And he doesn't sleep. He always take drugs. And he was shouting something while listening to Asin. Asin was his favorite. I don't know his psyche. So he loves listening to Asin while taking drugs. So anyway. So and also I knew who are taking drugs. No, they are everywhere. So this shitoto, tata, his. But everyone knew who are taking drugs, but we lived together. So although we complain behind, but so may pagkiksampa kami eh. So pag niyaya ko nila, Wataru tagay tayo. Kahit may drug addict, nakasama rin. Pero umalis ako pag medyo may amat na sila, baka delikado eh. So we had techniques to deal with these annoying people, no? So we were able to live together with these annoying others. So people have this, agency to live with annoying people. But after the war on drugs, of President Duterte, this cohabitation has lost. So these drug addicts has left. They lost the place to live in the community. So this diversity or this cohabitation with annoying others has lost. So so maybe we have to learn how we can live with annoying people, but we have also this dilemma. Even though we try to be tolerant with others, but these others may not be tolerant to you. So so even though you like to be friendly with others, but they are not always friendly to you. So so that's a big problem. So but we have to accept this. So we have to abandon. We cannot eliminate annoying others from our society. So we have to live together with them. However stressful is it. So you have to accept. That's my idea.
Okay.
I'm going to add that to the list of democratic paradoxes. Living with idiots.
Living with annoying others. Yeah. Well, I think the secret to that is practice. That's why I have this podcast. No, I'm kidding. We're still friends, and we enjoy it. And we definitely enjoyed this podcast, Wataru. I learned so much, not only just a great book writer, but also like very astute observer of Philippine politics, and I really learned a lot from this. So thank you. And thank you. Yeah.
Maraming salamat.
Maraming salamat.
Arigatou gozaimasu.
Maraming salamat.
Yeah. So I think we move now to the last portion of the podcast, which is the recommendations, where we recommend books or movies or videos that can help supplement or add to the topic that we just discussed. And so as the guest, Wataru, do you have anything to recommend maybe for...
Yeah, so I recently translated a book written by James Scott, so 2 Cheers for Anarchism.
2 Cheers for Anarchism.
Yeah, that's a small book, so that's but it condenses elements of James Scott's argument. I think this is good. So this is about how we can create kind of vernacular social order. So now Philippine politics is too much pursuing kind of morality, So but so the book somehow offers kind of alternatives. It's a bottom-up approach. There are no ideals. There are no, moralities. It's kind of everyday practice, everyday interaction among diverse people, everyday people can create better society. So it's not top-down moral approach. So I think this is somehow this would provide you kind of inspiration how to create. I think it tells a lot about the strengths of Philippine society. So the strengths of Philippine society is that you can create kind of community pantries or online community barter. So Philippine society is very good at creating mutual help kind of mutuality among people to help each other. So this is different from, so even so during the pandemic, even the leader, president, calling for discipline, and many people are supporting it. But so I observed how people violate lots of quarantine rules, no? So and people turns blind eyes each other, no? Actually, bawal, no? Bawal maglabas ang mga bata, bawal backriding ng motor, but actually people do it, and people, it's detma. Actually, detma is very good. Detma is kind of antithesis to the too much discipline, no? So people, I think Filipino people are too much pursuing this idea of discipline. So this is a kind of problem. So actually, I like kind of corrupt society in the Philippines.
Yeah.
A bit free.
Yeah.
Interesting. Okay. Actually, I appreciate that there's you learn from the wisdom of like the masses, but also, and you learn to understand discipline, but don't necessarily accept it wholeheartedly. So there's also wisdom in anarchy, I suppose. No hierarchy. So that's interesting. Good. Borge, anything?
I think I have to, other than Wataru's book, other than Moral Politics, I would recommend two other works. One would be by Eric Fromm. The title is the Anatomy of Human Destructiveness. So I think, curiously, I only read it during the election itself, but it could have explained so many things. One would be group narcissism, but I think the main argument of that is destructiveness is not due to natural impulses, because we're not like animals. We have weak natural impulses, and we are physically weak. Our our destructive nature is more defensive, but yung aggression is something due to environmental and structural conditions. And nabanggit nga ni Wataru kanina that there are changes right now. We are becoming more and more a stressed society, and a stressed society would either fall back into authoritarian tendencies or would demand others to comply para meron silang kasama sa pagiging stress nila. Again, discipline as a coping mechanism is you want it to spread out everywhere. But yeah, I think that would be enlightening. I think people can find electronic copies of it. But one would be I think a reply to Wataru's argument that the Filipino society actually have endemic mechanisms to create mutual help. I'm recommending Dr. Contreras' article, Ang Konsepto ng Pagsasaayos bilang Panimulang Postcolonial na Pagdalumat sa political sa panahong postmoderno. So it's about looking at endemic means of achieving order beyond state and beyond government institutions, that we have our own sense of order that can emerge out of it. So yeah, I'm recommending just two works, just to flesh out the issue.
Right. So I'm gonna recommend two books as well. Well, two items as well. First off, I'll do this. It's rare I get to do this, but I'm going to promote, my own chapter on. This time I used it on moral capital and in applying the moral politics actually to the Makati elections, and this can be found in patronage democracy, clans, clients, and competition, or clientelism in the Philippines. So it's a compiled work which is edited by Dr. Julio Tihanki and Dr. Cleo Kalimbahin. And one of my chapters actually adds a bit, it talks mainly about patronage democracy, but I added that because people have different moral judgments, it's not enough for you to buy votes. They can reject, they can still choose not to vote for you if you're not moral, there's this kind of embedded moral judgments that we don't understand. So that's what happened with Kid Peña, who ran with the Liberal Party, who presented himself as an alternative to Binay, who was an old, traditional politician with a lot of allegations of corruption, but they still went with the Binay family, which is a puzzle, but really It's because both of them engaged in patronage politics. So how can you? Which one do you choose? Do you choose the one that is, in a way, has no claims to moral superiority, or one that does, but at the same time still plays dirty politics? So yeah, that's interesting. Check it out. It's in Ateneo Press, where you can also find Wataru's book, Moral Politics in the Philippines. So yeah, it's actually just sold out, but when it gets in stock,
I sold out.
get a copy. Both of them actually are sold out. So, but we'll let you guys know when there is. And the second one is, I'll recommend a movie, and I'm not sure if I discussed this before, but it's one of my favorite films. It's called Babae. Yeah, no. It's Babae sa Septic Tank.
Okay, again.
Yeah. Did I say this before?
Yeah.
Well, might as well go with it again. Which episode? Well, it's a good.
Humingi ka na ng PK, Eugene Domingo, kaka-endorse.
Oh, nga.
Cinemalaya.
Yeah, that's true. She basically, it's the idea of the poor. They're trying to create a movie, about starring Eugene Domingo, about a poor mother, and they had this idea of the poor, but eventually, of course, clearly, the poor is something that we cannot claim to understand. In fact, the dramatic twist there is, the poor stole their camera, so how could they film it? So that's the interesting thing. It can never be. I think it's good to watch it again. I'll try to post a link, but yeah, wow, I'm starting to repeat myself. Anyway, so that's a recommendation.
May naalala lang ako yung, I think the arguments made by Wataru regarding social mobility, the emergence of lower middle class from the poor classes. There's actually a show that embodies that. You know what I mean? Pipito Manaloto, GMA, yung kay Michael V. Pipito Manaloto.
You know what?
Michael V.
Let's recommend that. Pipito Man, I have that. What's it about?
Ano siya? The first few episodes is very poor people. I think nanalo sa loto. Then nagkaroon na ng development sa buhay, so on and so forth. I didn't hindi ko nasundan but that's the track of the entire thing.
So in other words, all of a sudden they become,
wealthy.
Wealthy. Okay.
So
okay. So we should watch that. I should watch that maybe.
Yeah.
So I have more things to recommend. Anyway, so yeah, that's it. Wataru, anything you want to promote before we wrap this up? Or yeah.
At this moment, nothing. I just like to I really appreciate the participation of many audience. If I have opportunities, I'd like to discuss together with you. So that's my wish.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Thank you. And looking forward to whatever you have to publish next. Perhaps a sequel. I think it'd be good. Moralpolitics.com.
Moralpolitics.2.
Yeah. Or
Electric Boogaloo.
Yeah. So thank you very much again, Wataru, for that. If you want more PI podcast episodes, you can find us on Spotify, Anchor, and YouTube. If you have any suggestions for future episodes, you may contact us through our Facebook page or email us at pipodcastph@gmail.com. But until the next episode,
magandang gabi, mga ka-PI.